Thanks for watching Conversations Live on WPSU. I'm Bill Hallman. The spring planting season has begun, flowers are blooming, vegetables are growing, but it's not too late to get your garden on. If you have questions about your landscape, your fruit trees, your favorite shrub, or the pests that destroy them, now's your chance to call in. We have an expert panel on hand this evening. Let's meet them. Tom Butzler is a Penn State Extension horticulture educator. He works with commercial horticulture operations and the landscaping community in Clinton County. His areas of expertise are vegetable production and beekeeping. John Esslinger is a county-based extension educator with Penn State Extension. He works with fruit and vegetable growers and in greenhouse production. Justin Wheeler is a member of Penn State Extension's Master Gardener program. He's also a communications specialist for the Xerces Society, a nonprofit environmental organization that focuses on the conservation of invertebrates considered to be essential to biological diversity and ecosystem health. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight. You can join tonight's conversation. Our toll-free number is 1-800-543-8242, and our email address is connect@wpsu.org. Gentlemen, last spring we were talking about spikes in temperature into the 90 degrees. Things started off a little bit differently this year. We had a really wet beginning, and then it started to get really warm really quickly. So I want to get each of your thoughts on the start to the growing season here. We'll start with you, Tom. What should growers be wary of?
Actually, with the next hour we're going to talk about things going on in the garden, in the landscape, and that does require you to be out in the garden and the landscape. And so I was out yesterday, and the mosquitoes were plentiful. And as you mentioned, we had plenty of rain, and these warmer temperatures are really conducive to this organism. The population is really exploding. So that's something, as you're out there working in the garden and your landscape, maybe you want to try to manage for mosquitoes and getting rid of standing water, things like that are really key to their life cycle. So we'll see how it goes, but we're supposed to get some rain tonight here in central Pennsylvania. Tomorrow we got these warmer weather, warmer temperatures are going to stick with us. So I expect these mosquitoes are going to be kind of an issue for the next couple weeks.
Are there any standing water culprits that people need to be on the lookout for, where it usually pools and gathers in yards?
Yeah, well, I mean, it could be a low spot that just doesn't drain well, but it could be a flower pot where the water just sits there for an extended period of time. It could be a tire that you have leaning over against the shed. So anything that accumulates water and that water stands there for several days, that's enough for that mosquito, the female, to lay her eggs. It only takes, I think, maybe 5 or 7 days from an egg to an adult emerging from that water. And you don't have to worry about things like swimming pools. There's not enough organic matter in there for them to complete their life cycle. But yeah, anything that will hold water for several days.
Could be a long summer with mosquitoes.
Yep.
John, what are your thoughts on the beginning of the growing season here?
Well, so far the rainy weather has been very conducive for disease, and so we're watching a lot of different crops. There's already been quite a few reports of diseases in fruit trees. There's also some early signs of disease in vegetables, particularly tomatoes and some of the things that are more prone to diseases.
And you brought some examples of that, and we'll get to that later in the show. So, okay. And Justin, how about yourself?
Yeah, well, I think it was one of those years where we went straight from winter to summer and didn't really have too much of a spring. So what's being reflected in the calls to our Master Gardener hotline is that people are really struggling with those cold crops. So things like snap peas or broccoli, things like that nature are really struggling. Meanwhile, I was out in my yard yesterday, and all of my tomato plants are already flowering. So I would just say if you haven't gotten out there and planted your tomatoes and pumpkins and things of that nature yet, it's not a good year to be lazy about that sort of thing. You want to get right to it because we're going straight into summer.
Okay, and we already have a phone call, so let's go to our first phone call of the evening. Mike from Warren. Mike, are you with us? We do not have Mike. So I want to move on to some pests and something that the extension offices around the state are trying to get the word out on. Tom, and you brought in an example in the fall when you were here about the spotted lanternfly.
Right, that's correct.
It was discovered in Pennsylvania in 2014, and it poses a significant threat to a lot of different agricultural industries. Can you give us an update on the spotted lanternfly and what we should be aware of?
Right, so the spotted lanternfly, 2014, and the concern is its host range. I think it's up to about 70 different plants that it can feed on. And the big concern is with it's feeding on grapes, some of our hardwoods. We have a big hardwood industry, and then also a fruit tree. It'll feed on several fruit trees, so species of fruit trees. So there is concern on how that's going to affect the agriculture community. And so you can see up on the screen, for those folks who are watching this on TV, that you're observing the nymphal stage. They hatch from the eggs. They're the first stage, black with little white spots, and then they turn red, and then you get that kind of signature, almost a butterfly look when it becomes an adult. And it's not a moth or a butterfly. It falls into this plant hopper group. But yeah, there is a big concern. Right now, they've got a quarantine down in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. There's a big effort to keep it contained. I don't know if we're going to eradicate it and maybe just keep it contained until maybe some science catches up to where we can figure out maybe some of these other insects that might be antagonistic towards it, maybe keep that population in check. But who knows which way this is going to go? I mean, if you look at some of the history of invasive pests in Pennsylvania, we've had kind of a mixed bag. You know, the emerald ash borer we tried to quarantine that, and it just was like wildfire throughout Pennsylvania. But other viewers may not. It'd be interesting, how many of our viewers have ever heard plum pox virus? Probably many of them have not. And that was quarantined down in
Adams County.
Adams County. And there was a lot of effort put into quarantining or isolating that problem, and it worked. They wiped out this virus that was not found at that time anywhere else in Pennsylvania or in the United States. So we've had some success stories. So it'll be interesting to see which way this effort goes with the spotted lanternfly.
And John, we had a brief conversation before we went on the air about the spotted lanternfly. What should people do if they do see one of the three stages that we have shown on the air here?
I think it's important for people to familiarize themselves with the different life stages, know what to look for. You know, be very careful if you go into the quarantine area. Make sure that you don't have any of the nymphs, or, you know, at certain times of the year, the eggs being laid on vehicles, things like that. I had a call from a tree fruit grower that called and said, I think I have it. And I said, well, you probably don't. He said, well, we go and stay with my daughter who lives in the quarantine area, and we stay for a week at a time. And I was on his farm within an hour. And so those are the situations where we could have it moving around the state, and we want to avoid that.
And just to list some of the things that this targets, grapes, tree fruit, hardwood, nursery. So this is potentially $18 billion worth of agriculture at risk here. And Justin, you'd sent me an email before that there's no real typical place where they lay their eggs. So you could really be looking anywhere.
Yeah, usually when you're dealing with an insect pest, you can look for their eggs on a particular plant. As Tom mentioned, this is a species that will host on a wide range of plants. But one thing that's especially disconcerting about the spotted lanternfly is it'll lay its eggs on a building, as you said, cars, patio furniture. So one of the best things a home gardener can do is really familiarize themselves with what the egg mass looks like, and really be on the lookout for that, especially if you're in the quarantine area, looking at your patio furniture, looking around your house, and seeing if you have any of those egg masses. To my eye, it looks like dried yogurt kind of smeared on something. You know, if you spot that, to you know, scrape it off, kind of destroy it as quickly as you can.
We'll get to the call in just a second, but I know that the extension offices are hosting public meetings about the spotted lanternfly. So what should people know about those, and how can they attend any of those? Yeah,
we just did a whole series coming out of winter before, you know, everything kind of started out in the agricultural fields. But there were a series of meetings throughout the state. I don't know of any scheduled at this point, but you can probably get online. Penn State lists upcoming meetings and find out when those are occurring. But we go over the life cycle information, the identification, as was mentioned before. You know, recognizing the egg mass is really critical, because that is how we think it's going to move across the state. So if we can nip it in the bud early. So anyways, yeah, there are a lot of informational meetings throughout the state. And of course, you can always, on a search engine, type in spotted lanternfly. There are plenty of fact sheets by Penn State Extension, and also by Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. So the information is out there, readily accessible.
And this bug's a little bit different because it's not feeding on the fruit, it's the tree itself. Is that correct, John?
That's right. And what our concern is that it's going to weaken the trees, so we may have some more winter mortality. You know, fruit trees may, you know, be stressed enough that they won't set fruit the following year. You know, those kinds of issues are what we're concerned about.
Okay, we have Mike from Warren back on the line. Mike, thanks for calling back. Mike, what is your question?
Thanks for taking my call. I have a vegetable garden, and what's the most effective control for cutworms?
Is anyone familiar with the, what did you say, Mike, cutworm?
Cutworms.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a garden, I'd probably go with a product that contains spinosad. There's spinosad, most formulations of it are approved for organic gardening. Spinosad is very good on worms. And so you try to direct your spray towards the base of the plant where the insect will be feeding.
Okay, thanks a lot. I have one more question.
Go ahead.
What's the best diameter at ground level for the poles for pole beans?
What was that question?
Can you
again?
repeat your question? You cut out in our
get it?
earpiece there.
Okay, what is the best diameter at ground level for pole beans, for the poles for pole beans?
So a stake that you would use probably, as you say.
I don't know. I've never really
I
seen.
mean, they can get pretty rank. So you're going to want something, probably something at least an inch. If it's a good, oak or something like that. If it's a pine, you might want something a little bit bigger than that, just because with the wind they can get big.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
thank you
tend
very
to like
much.
Bamboo for that, but yeah, I don't know about particular diameter.
Yeah.
Something sturdy enough to
Yeah.
hold the
Sturdy
beam.
enough, and probably, I guess the other concern you mentioned, wind. I guess if it's enough foliage, it can almost act like a sail. So
Sure.
you've got to make sure it's almost staked on or heavy enough to
Yep.
withstand that.
And support it. We have another call. Mike, thanks for your call. We have Marlene from Phillipsburg on the line. Marlene, what's your question?
Yes, thank you. I've been waiting for this program.
Well, thank
I
you.
had an unusual problem. I've been gardening for 58 years and had beautiful gardens. In the last 12, 15, I've gone to, because of my age, a box garden. Last year, I decided to improve my soil, and I put manure. I purchased manure and put it on my garden, and you can't believe, I can't tell you how many seeds I planted, and I probably got a total of 10, and that included beans, zucchini, and cucumbers. The seeds did not come up. Now, I don't know that's one problem. The other problem this year is I bought topsoil from a local well-known establishment and started seeds inside tomato seeds, and they grew. But the next thing, they all died, like a disease, a blight. What is going on in that industry?
Justin, you want to tackle
I'm
this
going
first?
to hang up because I can't hear too well on the phone.
All right. Well,
Because I want to hear your response. So
Tuned
thank
in.
you for taking my call.
thank you, Marlene.
Sure. Well, as soon as she said manure, I was concerned because I thought she was going to say she was overrun with weeds. But either way, generally when you get manure, it's not great for a garden in general, but it's really not great for a raised bed situation, and that's usually because the manure is often not composted. So it's come in out of the animal with a lot of undigested weed seeds. It's not actually very nutritious. It's just not, it's too kind of heavy for a raised bed garden. So it's just not really an ideal soil amendment. Compost or even composted manure would be a better choice. And I think her germination issues might be reflective of the fact that because it wasn't composted, it was really hot and probably, could have cooked the seeds or limited her germination. In terms of the tomato germination from topsoil, it's really hard to say, not knowing exactly what she's working with. It could be that there's some damping off that she's experiencing, just maybe not enough nutrients in the soil if she's using just straight topsoil, or that it's just, again, too heavy and too wet for starting seeds. You'd really want a soil starting mix, or barring that, a potting mix, something that's going to be nice and light and retain a lot of water.
And your potting mix is typically, it's peat or perlite or vermiculite.
yeah.
It doesn't have soil.
Yeah.
So, one of the things would be this issue, as he mentioned, was Pythium or some sort of microorganism that's in that topsoil, that when you place a seed in there, you water it, and maybe you put some plastic or something over, create a humid environment. It's really aggressive on those young seedlings.
Yeah. And so I would say if she wants to correct the situation in her raised bed, definitely introduce some compost, introduce some perlite or some vermiculite, something that's going to really lighten that up. In a raised bed, you want a very light soil.
And Marlene's actually back on the line. She called us back. I'm told she has another question. Marlene, go ahead.
It was mushroom manure, not regular manure.
Okay.
It was mushroom manure that I put on my garden.
Yeah.
And my seeds didn't grow.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say 9 times out of 10 that stuff is sold right out of the back of the greenhouse and hasn't been composted either. Mushroom compost is really not compost. It's a growing medium that mushroom growers use. And, oftentimes, unless it's sat around, it's been out there, for a season or two, it's actually not composted either. So that will probably actually be, the mushroom compost will probably be better this year than what you experienced last year.
Yeah, and mushroom soil tends to be very high in salt, and so the salt would cause those seedlings to not do well.
Marlene, thank you so much for calling back. I think we helped clarify some things for you there. Jeff from Cambria, you are on the line with us next. Jeff, go ahead. Jeff, are you there?
Hi. I would like to ask about my lawn. Every year I seem to get pink patch and red thread.
Right, so red thread is a fungal organism, and it's very descriptive. I mean, I've got it in my lawn. So you've got this nice green grass, and then you've got this red thread coming up in certain sections. It looks like red thread. And it's just the environment that we have right now. It's very wet, and we've got some of these cool nights and cooler nights and warm temperatures during the day, real conducive to it. One thing you could do is maybe slowly switch your turf grass variety. There are certain ones that are more susceptible to red thread than others. And then the other one, if I recall correctly, is you might want to ease up on the nitrogen application. And Jeff, question to you, do you fertilize your lawn on a regular basis?
Yes.
Okay. So I believe there's several diseases that occur on turf, but I believe this is one of those ones that with too much nitrogen, it does promote red thread. So you might want to reevaluate how much nitrogen you're putting down on your lawn.
Okay, and he mentioned pink patch. Is that similar
Thank
problem?
you.
Yeah, pink patch is also a fungal
same.
organism, right. And so again, it's basically along the same line of red thread.
Okay.
You might want to review your fertilization program.
Okay.
And maybe look at some different species of turf grass as you do some overseeding in these areas that might die out.
Okay. Jeff, thanks for your call. If you're just joining us, I'm Bill Hallman, and this is Conversations Live. Get your garden on WPSU. Our guests tonight are Penn State Extension educators Tom Butzler and John Esslinger, and Master Gardener Justin Wheeler. Our telephone number is 1-800-543-8242, and our panel is ready to take your calls. Or if you'd prefer to email us, our address is connect@wpsu.org. Justin, we had a brief email conversation before you came on today, and you brought up something called lazy lawn mowing, and we'll get to that, and it has a lot to do with promoting habitat for pollinators. But how about a quick pollinator update, especially the bee population? It seems like there have been for several years now articles or studies about the decline in bee populations. What update can you give us on that?
Sure. So regarding honeybees, the declines are stabilized, but they're still hovering around 50%, 40% winter die-offs each year. So that's troubling. But what we're seeing is that these levels of decline are also following along the same lines for all the wild bee species as well. So they're facing the similar issues of diseases, interactions with pesticide, loss of habitat. So it's kind of affecting all of the bee populations.
So that points us to discussions about what we can do to make a better environment for those pollinators. And you pointed me towards a recent experiment by Susanna Lerman. She's with the USDA Northern Research Station. And her experiment found that mowing lawns every other week instead of weekly led to an increase of bee diversity and abundance. They documented some 93 to 111 bee species, and that's nearly a quarter of all native bee species. So Explain lazy lawn mowing to us.
Yeah, well, this was a great study where she took a bunch of residential lawns in Massachusetts, and they mowed them in intervals of every week, every other week, and then every 3 weeks. And they found in doing so that mowing your lawn every 10 days to 2 weeks actually had a huge increase in both bee abundance and diversity. That was largely due to the fact that bees had access to some of the, weedy things that you might find in your lawn, like dandelions and violets. So it was providing forage and habitat for those bees.
So there's some drawbacks to a plan like this. You might have an HOA, or you might have some weed laws in your town. What can people who are interested in growing their lawn a little bit longer, what can they do to kind of change minds and change policy in the local governments where they live?
Yeah, so I've been experimenting with this myself, much probably to my neighbor's chagrin. And it's interesting, even with all the wet weather we've had, my lawn, mowing it every other week, hasn't gotten above the threshold to violate weed ordinance. So I think in the State College Borough and here in Pennsylvania and in many jurisdictions, it's around 4 inches, I think, is the weed ordinance.
I don't know around here.
Yeah, I think it's something like that. So the lawn is still pretty much staying but below that level. But I think one of the best things you can do is engage in conversation about it with your local health department. In the borough, they have a optional program where you can register your natural lawn, and so that they know what's going on and that you're not just letting things go. But generally speaking, I know it sounds a bit radical to not mow your lawn every week, but if you can, the more you can cut back, even if you can just do it every 10 days rather than every 7 days, it's going to provide some benefit.
The other drawback on that, I did see that study, and I wonder where we have more of this interface between urban and kind of the rural area, with that higher grass height, would ticks become an issue? Because now, they like the perimeter of the yard where it's kind of moist, and they stay out of the central part of the yard where it's kind of sun-baked. And so with that higher vegetation, you think that would be a problem with ticks kind of moving more into the interior of the yard?
I don't think that you're going to get so much growth that it's going to be that dramatic of a change. We're not talking about just letting things go entirely. And what was also interesting about the study is if you actually let the grass get too long, when they did the 3-week study, they saw the numbers go right back down to as if you were mowing it every week, because the grass is so long that it's actually obscuring the flowers that are going to be beneficial to bees. So it's all, we say every other week, but really it's using your best judgment to the growing conditions and just, keeping your grass a little longer than normal, maybe mowing it a little less frequently.
It shouldn't be a tough sell. If you tell me I don't mow my lawn every other week, I tell my wife, and we'll all be happy, and it will work out.
Yeah.
So it's something like I mentioned, just engaging the public and maybe it's the benefits of higher grass and pollinators.
Yeah, it's good for the lawn too, to an extent, of course. But the more you cut your lawn, the more it grows, the more it dries out. So leaving it a little longer is actually going to be potentially helpful for the lawn as well.
You might upset some of the kids in the neighborhood who might depend on that paycheck coming in every week, but I think they'll be all right.
Yeah, and the other benefit, talking about the health of the lawn, is that one of the ways to control weeds in the lawn is for a denser stand of grass. Some of these weed seeds that blow in, they need sunlight to germinate, and if you have that tall stand of grass, they won't be able to germinate. So, and there are a lot of benefits to it.
And there's some other creative ways that you can rethink your lawn, and maybe we'll get to that, but I want to get to another phone call. We have Marion from Myersdale. Marion, thanks for holding. What's your question? Marion, are you with us? All right, Marion, if you could turn your TV down if you hear us. Tom from Huntington, are you there? Here she is. Marion, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead, Marion.
I'm just nervous that my question might be a little too trite for all of you, but...
No, go ahead. We're here for you, Marion. Go ahead. And please, if you can, please turn your TV down. I think you've got a little echo behind you, and it's confusing.
In any case, I have been infested. This past month, my entire... Oh, okay. this past month I have been infested with these bizarre black ants, and they're big ants. They're not little ants, and they're really intelligent. I mean, they're everywhere, and I'm really not the kind of person that likes to kill anything, but I've been catching them and taking them outside, but they're just everywhere. And they're intelligent. And they're fast, and I just don't know. And I've been doing, it's like every day I go out to my kitchen, and it's like I have to count, well, how many am I going to have to deal with today? I don't know what to do.
Any advice for Marion?
Well, have you tried naming them? If you say they're intelligent, they sound like they could be good pets. But I don't know about you guys, but to me it sounds like carpenter ants.
That's exactly. First, yeah.
And having had a lot of carpenter ant damage to my home, I love insects probably way more than the next guy. But carpenter ants belong outside. So it sounds like they're getting in. They're probably looking for water. A product that I have used successfully is called Terro. It's Terro, and it's boric acid based, and so it's not like a hugely toxic thing for the environment. They take that back to their nest, and it kind of wipes them out. But I don't know. It could sound like you have some new friends.
Yeah, I've had some experience using the Terro product, and it usually wipes them out for a couple weeks. Another batch will show up, but it usually does a pretty good job of clearing them out for at least a couple weeks anyway, until the next round shows up. Marion, thank you so much for calling in. Tom from Huntingdon, you're up next. Tom, what's your question?
Why, I seem to have a slug infestation, and I don't know whether it's due to just the wet weather or perhaps the plantings or the mulch. Do you have any suggestions on slug control, or what's the best slug control you can recommend?
Yeah,
John, you want to go ahead?
Slugs do like this weather. I mean, it's been consistently moist for them, and that's what they like. There are some slug baits that work fairly well. There's some they're more of an iron-based. Sluggo is one of them that are effective and less toxic. And that's probably your best bet. We create these environments where we're using mulch and keeping their plants happy and stress-free, and that also is helping the slugs. In your garden, trying to keep that top layer of soil loose, helps that to dry out a little bit and reduces some of the slug pressure. But if you're doing a lot of things to help your soils with mulches and cover crops and things like that, you have more organic matter, and the slugs like that.
Okay. So Sluggo is your best recommendation?
That's one of the products, yes.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Tom, thanks for your call. We have an email in next, and the email is from Darlene. She writes, we have several black walnut trees on our property. I recently heard of a black walnut toxin, and I can't pronounce what that is. Anybody else?
Jugalone.
Jugalone. Could this possibly be the reason why we have lost several newly planted fruit trees over the past few years, apple and peach? Also, how does this toxin affect a vegetable garden?
It's
John?
It's very good, yeah. It's very good at killing fruit trees, yeah. I actually see it in orchards where there's a walnut in the wood line next to the orchard, and there'll be a semicircle of dead trees around the walnut. It also does affect some of our vegetables. Tomatoes are very sensitive to it. I've seen where a walnut tree, again, is on the edge of the field, and you'll go out 75 feet into the field and see the walnut wilt in that area. Yeah, and there's not anything you can do about it. There's not, extra water or extra care, compost or anything like that's not going to help.
Go ahead, Justin.
Well, the jugalone compound is present in all parts of the plant, so the leaves as well. So when you're saying you see it 75, feet into a crop, it's because probably it's being transmitted on the leaves. There are a huge number of crops, both ornamental, vegetable, and fruit crops that are resistant to jugalone. But apples, tomatoes, things like this are going to be highly sensitive. But if you Google jugalone resistant plants. There's a number of really great lists out there. Morton Arboretum has a great list. Penn State has a great list. So it's not all hope is lost, but you definitely have to readjust what you're planning to accommodate it.
A good question, good information. We have another email from Tom this time. Tom writes, our condo has a stand of tall and old linden trees nearby. We now have a young, about 4 feet tall linden tree growing in a small flower bed that will not support the tree forever. Can the baby linden tree be successfully transplanted to another place where it can grow? Anyone familiar with that type of tree?
Sure. I mean, there's a bunch of them on campus, and the answer is yes, it can be successfully transplanted, but how much effort do you want to put into it? Because there is a formula out there on the caliper, the size of that trunk of the tree, the size of the root ball that you're going to have to dig up in order for it to survive. And so for a 4-inch, he said 4 foot tall. Yeah, 4 foot tall. So yeah, I mean, you'd have to have a pretty good sized root ball to successfully move that. Now, one thing they could do, Tom could do to ensure better survivability is this year is to what we call root prune it. So maybe on the north side and the south side, get a spade and go out several inches, a foot and a half. I'd have to look up the parameters on that, but go out north and south and dig down into the soil and sever those roots. And then what will happen is they'll have new root growth generate within that ball area that you're going to eventually move. And then you could do that east and west at a later time. And again, you'll sever the roots, but those roots that are left intact within that root ball area, they'll regenerate some roots and be able to maybe better survive that move to a new site.
Is that root ball something he can just dig with a shovel when he wants to transplant, or is there a special
Well,
device that
you know,
can help
I'm trying
him
to
do it?
think on a 4 foot tall linden tree. It's probably a pretty thin diameter, so it's not going to be something where you got to rent a piece of equipment. Yeah. You could do it with a shovel. Still, you'd want to get a nice sized root ball. But you know, you look at Penn State's Arboretum and the Hosler oak, and the size of that root ball. Now that's an extreme example, of course, but it was a massive root ball that took some massive equipment to move. He should be able to do that. Now, again, you wouldn't want to move it now. This is something you'd want to do in the dormant season. Right now, you put a lot of stress on the tree, and it would probably never be able to recover that move going into this hot weather that we have for the next several months.
Okay. If you're just joining us, I'm Bill Hallman, and this is Conversations Live, Get Your Garden On WPSU. Our guests tonight are State Extension educators Tom Butzler and John Esslinger, and Master Gardener Justin Wheeler. Our telephone number is 1-800-543-8242, and our panel is ready to take your phone calls. If you'd prefer to email us, our address is connect@wpsu.org. John, I want to get to you. You brought in an example today, a little show and tell for us, and you have a pot behind you. It is actually a sweet potato, which I've never seen growing until today. So.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about growing your own plants. It's fairly easy to do. It's important you start out with get your potato in the fall. And what I like to do is a relatively small, medium to small size sweet potato. And it's important that when you store them over winter that you keep them warm. So I keep them upstairs in the house. I do not put them in the basement where it gets colder. If you store them in a cold area, they won't sprout in the spring, so keep them warm during the winter. I planted this about 1.5 inches down into the soil, and typically when it gets warm, it really likes warm weather, so if you're keeping it in a 60 or so degrees, you're not going to get many sprouts, or the sprouts will be very slow, but once it gets warm, they'll really come. I've got 2 little potatoes in here, and I've already taken about a dozen sprouts out and planted them in the garden. So when it's time to plant them, you just kind of reach down in, and you'll feel that where it's connected to the sweet potato, and you'll just want to break that off. Okay, and now you've got a little plant there. You can see you've got the roots, but you do want to be careful in that the roots aren't nearly big enough to support that plant. So when you first plant that in your garden, you want to kind of protect it. Now, we've been getting a lot of cloudy days, and so it's been pretty easy this year. But on a bright sunny day, I cover them up for the first week or so, just because there's not enough root there to handle that leaf material that's transpiring. Do that for about a week, and you'll see they'll take off, and you'll get lots of plants. Now, like I said, I've already gotten about a dozen, and there'll be probably 5 or 6 more come off of this. So you can get a lot of little seedling plants off of a couple of potatoes. That's
pretty cool. So I have experience growing regular potatoes. Does sweet potato grow the same way underground and dig them up?
It's actually, the potato is actually part of the root system.
Okay, yeah.
And they're a little more of a vine,
okay,
than a white potato. They like it warm. You get a good hot summer, you get lots of sweet potatoes, where the white potatoes like a little cooler summer. But yeah, they do well in our area, and it's amazing when you dig them up. Each plant makes quite a few potatoes.
How far apart do you have to plant the starters?
I plant them about 18 inches. That's a little tight, but 2 feet is fine.
Okay. We have another phone call in. Susan from State College. Susan, thank you for calling. What's your question?
My question is concerning a dogwood that I have planted in my backyard. It's a Cuccia Dogwood, and last year it was just beautiful with loads of white flowers. This year there's hardly anything on it, although the little tree itself is about twice as big as it was last year. And I've sort of looked around the neighborhood here in Park Forest Village and State College, and I don't see many other dogwoods doing much better. Is it something to do with the weather this year?
My dogwoods, now I live over towards the Williamsport area, but my Cuccia Dogwood's in full bloom. It looks great. So something happened here?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because I just noticed today that there's a Cuccia Dogwood on our street, and it's only just started blooming. So I would suspect it might be something to do with the weather.
Okay.
But yeah, it's I haven't checked it out or noticed it before today.
So Susan, if you're still on, so
sure.
Does it look like it's going to bloom?
Well, it looks like it's about all the blooms I'm going to get. There's just a few on each branch. But like I said last year, it was just covered with white flowers.
Yeah, it might be. And you've done nothing. So you said this is kind of, you've noticed this in the neighborhood. It's kind of playing out the same way.
Right.
Right. So, if it was just your tree, maybe it was fertilization or something that happened around that tree. But this does sound like it's an environmental issue. Maybe it's something that occurred in the winter. Maybe it nipped the flower buds or the terminal growth and did something there. But yeah, outside this area, they seem to be doing fine.
Just one quick question about a Cuccia Dogwood. Should they be fertilized at all?
No, I think once it's established, it's fine.
Okay.
I think you'd be fine not fertilizing it.
Well, I'll just keep watching it and see what happens next year.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thanks.
Good luck. Thanks, Susan. Our next caller, Bill from Ebensburg. Bill, what's your question?
My question is about ways to keep bunny rabbits from eating your young, tender plants in your garden. Humane ways, like I heard of putting plastic forks around your plants. So when they put their nose down to eat your plants, they get poked in the nose and they refrain from eating your young plants. Have you heard any other humane ways of keeping varmints out of your garden, other than like fencing your whole garden in?
Well, me personally, I do the chicken wire around the fence, and it works very, very well, keeping out not only the rabbits but the groundhogs. I do have to sink it a little bit, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, exclusion is kind of your only option, and I know you said you didn't want to fence your whole yard, but even putting chicken wire around individual plants, unlike Bugs Bunny, North American rabbits don't actually burrow, so they aren't going to dig under that chicken wire. So whatever you can put in the ground around your plants is going to protect them. I think the plastic forks might be somewhere along those lines of maybe trying to deter them, but I don't know how effective that's going to be, and it sounds like you need a whole lot of forks. So I don't know if you can protect individual plants or not, but that would be the way to go.
Product out that it deters like deer and rabbits that you can put in your garden?
Oh my gosh, I've tried so many different things, and they sell a lot of things that have sulfur in them and smell like rotten eggs and cayenne pepper and all these crazy things. I've not known a spray to really deter rabbits or deer. I mean, if they're hungry enough, they're going to eat whatever they can get to. But excluding them in any way you can is going to probably help.
So chicken wire be the best option then?
A few years ago, I did some research on different repellents, and if you're chasing them, and this was on a farm level, if you're trying to keep them out of your tomatoes and they can go to your neighbor's tomatoes, then the repellents worked. But when there's nothing else for them to eat, they ate them anyway.
Right.
Just chase them to the neighbor's yard.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. Paul from Sykesville, thanks for calling us. Paul, what's your question?
Yeah, I love your show, bud. I'm watching it now. I watch it all the time it goes on.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm from Sykesville, Pennsylvania, and I have a problem with cucumbers. It seems like they grow real nice and start vining, and then they'll die off. They'll turn brown and just die off, and I don't know if it's a blight or what it is. I'll hang up, and you guys can talk about it. Thanks so much.
All right, Paul, thanks. Any cucumber advice for Paul?
It's bacterial wilt, yeah.
John, go ahead.
He's describing bacterial wilt. And bacterial wilt is a disease. It's a bacterial disease that's actually in the gut of cucumber beetles. And then when the cucumber beetle feeds on the plant, it makes a wound, and then the material that comes out the back end of the beetle is loaded with the bacteria. And then the bacteria gets into the plant, it builds up over a week or two, and it gets to the point where it plugs up the vascular system of the plant, and it kills the plant. And so the secret there is control the cucumber beetles.
So how does he do that?
They're tough. There's not a real good organic product that does a good job on them. A lot of the other insecticides, pyrethrins or 7, work well on them. But some growers have tried excluding, and what you have to be careful about if you're doing that is you can use like a row cover or something like that, but you make sure that you're not covering up an area where something in that cucurbit family was growing last year, because then you're just trapping them underneath the cover. But the covers do work. And it's a really important early, because the plants are very susceptible when they're young. As the plant gets older, it builds up some natural resistance to the bacteria. And so if you can keep them out for those first few weeks, that's important.
Okay.
The other thing came to mind when he posed that question was downy mildew, because he talked about browning too.
Yeah, that could happen later in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't catch a time frame when he said they were wilting down or breaking down.
We have an email in, and this one is from Terry. Terry writes, "We're having trouble establishing a grapevine. Deer and frost have damaged early growth. As the season progresses, it seems as though the growth is stunted. Should we fertilize? Is water a factor? And is there a product to help deter deer and groundhogs?" Any advice for Terry and his woeful grapevine?
Well, it sounds like he's got a lot going on. If it's being grazed by deer early in the season, that's not going to be great for that grapevine. It doesn't sound like fertilization is really an issue. It sounds more like that he's having some kind of issues with pests or, some kind of animals eating it. So I don't know if again, exclusion, trying to protect that vine early in the season, making sure it gets well watered, making sure it gets enough sun. It's going to want to have full sun, and grapes don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think grapes generally like wet feet. So good drainage and kind of the right soil and good air movement around the grapevine.
I had that situation. It was a particular variety that the deer just loved. They wouldn't leave it alone. And finally, I built a woven wire fence around it, and now it's the strongest plant I've got. But it took it a lot of years to recover from that deer feeding.
The nice thing is grapes can take really heavy pruning. So as long as he can keep it healthy, this year and for a few years, it'll probably return and be better than ever.
So keep it away from the pests and worry about if there's another problem later after it gets back a little hardier.
Yeah. First thing's get the deer away.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And we have another phone call coming in. Dorothy from State College. Dorothy, thank you so much for calling. What's your question?
I would like to find a tree called Malus floribunda. It's one that I planted over my lifetime several times with great luck and enjoyment. It's the old-fashioned, original flowering crab, and it is just gorgeous in the spring, a cloud of white with little intense pink in each flower. It's easy to grow, nothing bothers it, no disease, nothing. And it gets about 15 feet and grows fairly rapidly, and it stops. So it's a great size outside a window or something. But I can't find it in the marketplace anymore. That's Malus as an apple, M-A-L-U-S, floribunda. Anybody seen it around or got a clue about where I might find one?
John, I see you nodding your head. You
I
know where to help her?
No, I understand what she's saying, but no, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, other than just searching online.
But I wonder, she's saying it's an older, I'm not real familiar with that one, but it's an older variety, she's saying?
It's a,
Oh yeah. I planted my first Malus floribunda about 50 years ago.
Okay.
Before all the varieties were introduced, all the fancy ones.
Right. So
And we're losing wonderful tree of losing this one.
So I'm wondering though if you know some of these older varieties of apples and crab apples are very susceptible to several foliar diseases, and I'm just wondering if you're not seeing this one in the trade is because it's one of these susceptible crab apples, and there's a lot of new ones that have come onto the marketplace that have some of this disease resistance built in. So that's about the only thing I can think of.
So if I'm not mistaken, it might be the native crab apple, floribunda. I could be mistaken on that, and so I would say that you might want to check with a native plant nursery. But you know what's happened is crab apples have been highly hybridized. We've brought over a lot of Asian varieties, a lot of cultivars. So it's probably just one that's fallen out of fashion. And you might have to go online or find a specialty nursery in order to track it down.
If it is a native one, there are several native plant nurseries. So just check those sites.
It rings a bell. I feel like I encountered it recently, but I'd have to look it up to see if that's the native one or not.
Dorothy, good luck trying to track that down. We have another phone call. This one is from Jerry. Jerry in Williamsburg. Jerry, what's your question?
I have a backyard fruit tree orchard and also some trees at my daughter's and my sister's, and I've been doing this for 30 years, but I'm starting to have more and more trouble with fire blight. Right now it's the worst I've ever had. My Bartlett pear, yellow transparent apple, one tree I think is kind of like a John of Gold. It's just covered with it. And I didn't spray for it this year. I've tried copper sulfate other years. I've tried streptomycin, and they didn't really help much at all when I had it 2 years ago. Last summer I wasn't bothered much with it. But anyway, this year I can just see it's going to be awful because when it's this bad this early, it's just going to keep coming back. I cut it out with Clorox solution, and that gets rid of it. But then about a week later, it reappears here and there. Do you know anything I can do to deal with that? There it is. I see it on the screen.
This is something that John actually wanted to talk about today. He sent us this picture before the show so we could talk about it. John, you told me earlier this is a product of the wet start to spring.
Yeah, and the years when we have a lot of rain during bloom is when the fire blight is the worst. It sounds like you know the proper things you need to do. You mentioned the copper sprays during dormant, and that's really important because what that does is it kind of sterilizes your surface of your trees. When you have fire blight in your apples and pears, it's extremely important that you prune it all out. I mean, just take time, make sure you look at the limbs from all different angles, that you're not missing any, because that's how it overwinters. And the recommendation is to take out from where you see the fire blight stopped on that limb, go at least 8 inches, 10 inches is probably better, and make your cut there. The best time to do that is when it's cold, like in February. Make sure that when you make those cuts that you take them out of your orchard area, burn them, send them to the landfill, get rid of them, get them away from the trees. Get your copper sprays on, and then during bloom, keep the streptomycin sprays. we've had so much rain, and then I work with commercial orchard people that, they'd put a spray on and then it would rain. And, well, okay. And typically we put about 2 sprays on during the bloom period, and that's enough. This year probably wasn't enough, just the way that it rained. But if you do those things and you're really diligent, I mean, I've had it get in my own pear trees to where I had to take off about half the tree, pruned it out, and then started the tree all over again. In a few years, I had the normal looking tree again. But so be very aggressive with your pruning. If you're not sure how far to go, make sure you take that extra step and get rid of it, and then totally get rid of it out of the orchard area.
So Jerry, it sounds like you're not the only one dealing with this problem. Thank you for calling. We have a few minutes left in the show. We'll try to get to all of our calls. Up next, we have Bill from Mahaffey. Bill, what is your question?
Yeah. What the sound turned out. I used to always save my old potatoes because the eyes on them and everything. Now this year they're all rotted and there's no eyes, just on one maybe, a couple eyes. And what I've been told that they're spraying the potatoes to keep the eyes off them so they'll last longer. So I sell them longer in the stores. I'm wondering, is this safe to eat, or is there's precautions we should take before we eat potatoes anymore? Because everything's sprayed.
Yeah, it's a sprout inhibitor, and yeah, they are safe to eat. Yeah, and I thought you were going to say that you wanted to use those potatoes for seed potatoes, and that's not recommended. Only because you're not going to get a good crop that way.
I do. I do. I always have.
Well, yeah, I would make sure that you either buy new seed potatoes each year, or if you have nice clean potatoes that you grew yourself, that you don't have any disease issues with at all, then you could take a little bit of a risk and plant those for seed. But in the situation you described that you're seeing this year, I would absolutely get rid of those. I would not use those for seed. Okay, I'd get some clean seed potatoes.
Bill, thank you so much for your call. Marilyn from State College. Marilyn, what's your question?
My question is, a landscaper planted in my neighbor's yard a tree or bush called shade bush, and it is now growing over in my yard, and I don't know if this is a systemic problem or rather this is something that you can dig up. I do not want this smoke bush, as they refer to it, in my yard. Could you please help me with this problem?
So is this something that would be growing up from the ground in her yard?
Yes.
Or okay.
So
Yes.
the genus is Catinus, but I'm not familiar with its suckering. Will they sucker?
Well, yeah, the more you cut it, the more it suckers
Okay.
too. So I went to battle with one in my yard that I inherited and didn't want, and thought, oh, I'll just keep cutting it and cutting it. And that just stimulated growth, and it started sending out runners further and further. So I'm not sure what to tell you in terms of dealing with it just on your side, but I would definitely recommend do not cut it anymore, because the more you cut it, the more it's actually going to grow and spread into your yard.
Well, I'm not cutting it. It belongs to my neighbor.
Well,
but it's now growing in my yard.
Okay. It should stop at a point as long as it's not being trimmed. So there should be it shouldn't take over your yard, and it might already be further in your yard than you'd like, but it should stop at a certain point. They usually remain fairly upright. They don't grow more than around 8 to, I would say, 10 feet in diameter, pretty rarely. So maybe it's planted too close to your house or your property line, but you might have to talk to your neighbor about it and see if it's young enough, if it can be moved, or otherwise relocated in some way. But definitely don't do any pruning on it.
I wish that my neighbor would understand that because I keep trying to cut it back.
And that's what's stimulating the growth into your yard. Yeah, so you might want to talk to your neighbor about not cutting that plant anymore.
Is the best way to get rid of it is to actually dig it up?
That would be really tough because you'd have to, if it's sending out suckers, you'd have to cut the suckers away from the main plant. It's something you'd be battling with year after year. So, a better strategy is, like I said, if you can get either your neighbor or yourself to not prune that plant anymore and just kind of let it grow to its final height and width.
How long does it take, how many years to get to that point?
Oh, that I couldn't say.
It's a dilemma.
Well, Marilyn, best of luck to you. We have about 1 minute.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have about 1 minute left. Any closing thoughts before we head out?
We've talked about the wet, rainy season. It's going to get hot and dry sometime, and I'm big on getting rain barrels and good time to collect this rain and save it for the middle of the summer.
Sounds good, John.
Just because we're set up to have some issues with both insects and diseases, watch your gardens closely. Try to catch things early and stop it before it gets to be a problem.
And Justin?
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. We've historically had some weeks of drought in the summer in the last couple of years, so just keep an eye on watering and water early in the morning and low at the base of the plants and do what you can do.
Sounds good. I have lots of questions that we didn't get to today, so we had a pretty good discussion, lots of good callers today. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for emailing in, and I'd like to thank our guests, Penn State Extension educators Tom Butzler, John Esslinger, and Master Gardener Justin Wheeler. I'm Bill Hallman. For all of us here at WPSU, thanks for watching. Good night.